Welcome into the Autzen Audibles podcast. I'm at Prehm and Jared Mack on the show. Welcome to the Monday Mailbag. It's a little bit different format today. Eric's sick, so hopefully Eric can get through that illness quickly and get back for next week's mailbag. But nonetheless, it moves on. The show moves on. Oregon, number one in the country for the first time since 2012. It's going to be a topic for sure on the mailbag today. Oregon 7-0. Turning the page after a 35-0 win at Purdue. Jared, let's just dive right into this. And it kind of goes maybe into this week. I don't know. Big Noah asks, which remaining game do you anticipate being the biggest challenge for the Ducks? Hashtag Autzen Audibles. The schedule is flipped to the second half of the season. This weekend's game is a top 25 matchup against number 20 Illinois that I don't think many people expected to see. Michigan is next. They're not ranked. Maryland follows that at home. And then you have a trip to Wisconsin on the road in mid-November, and then a bye week. And then you play a Washington team to close out the season, in the regular season. I guess of those 5 remaining games, which sounds crazy to say, which one is the toughest one we feel like?
To me, I'm always going to side with the away games as being the hardest. So I'm going to go with the Wisconsin game because Michigan is just, I don't know. It's not like they can't upset Oregon just because of how good their defense plays. And again, they're on the road and the Big House is a real place. But Oregon has to score like 24 points, and that's basically all they have to do to really, put themselves in position to win against a Michigan team. And I think that they're capable of doing that. So this Wisconsin game, I think, is kind of more of an unknown for me. Like Wisconsin is really up and down this season. They've had big wins, they've had big losses. Camp Randall is a real tough environment. So I'm always going to side with the road game for the toughest game on any schedule. But this one against Illinois coming up this week is probably number 2, if not teetering on number 1. I think Illinois is a solid team. I think their defense has some overarching problems that can probably be fixed by being a little bit more coachable, a little bit more like relying more on execution rather than instincts on that defense. But I still think Oregon has a significant advantage, and that's why they're like a 23-point favorite, I think it is, this weekend. So I think it's Wisconsin as of now, but the Illinois game shouldn't be slept on.
I think Michigan, you want to say like that one should be tough, but your point is their offense is terrible. And if you can score, it might not even be your 24 points. It might be 21 or 20. And you can walk out of the Big House with a victory. It still scares me because it's a road game. They still have NFL dudes on the defensive side of the football. But their offense is just so bad. I would probably agree. Like the Wisconsin game for now. And the reason why I say for now is because they whacked Purdue 52-6. They beat Rutgers 42-7 on the road, which is a pretty big win. And then they went and they won at Northwestern 23-3. None of those 3 teams. I mean, I guess Rutgers maybe is kind of a good team, but they're 1-3 in conference play, and they've kind of beaten up on the bad teams in the league after losing 2 straight. One to Alabama 42-10 at home, and then they went to LA the next week or 2 weeks later, and they lost that game 38-21, a game in which they looked like they were going to kind of win or at least be really competitive, and ended up not being competitive in the second half. So, yeah, I would probably say Camp Randall just because it's mid-November. They seem to have kind of righted the ship, but I agree with you. It could morph where by the end of Saturday night, it could have been, hey, this Illinois game was the toughest game left on the schedule because Wisconsin has to go to – they have to play Penn State this weekend. They got to go to Iowa the following week. Then they get a bye, and then they play Oregon, and then they play at Nebraska, and they play Minnesota. Like they could easily have 3 more losses to their name and be a 7-5 program after the end of the season's over. Illinois, we'll see. It's going to be a good like identity test for who they are this week. They played Penn State earlier in the year, and it really, quite honestly, wasn't competitive, even though it was 21-7. So we'll see. But I would agree with you. It's probably one of these two games, Wisconsin or Illinois. All right, next one, Jamison
Oh,
White.
I did want to go and
Sure.
like say that the Washington game shouldn't be slept on. Like I know Washington has stumbled this year, and when they need to execute the most, they just haven't. They've had some just mind-numbing plays on offense and defense, and some silly penalties here and there. But when that offense is clicking, it's really clicking. It fires on all cylinders and can really put up some points and some yards real quick. So I know that it's been kind of the fun thing to do the last couple of weeks if you're an Oregon fan, if you're on Oregon social media and you're part of that community, is to kind of dog on the dogs. But that's a good offense, and if Oregon is like that 11-0 mark heading into that game, like Washington's going to be
Oh, they're going to be
feeling
amped
real
up.
sweet about the chances of ruining a perfect season, the first perfect season for Oregon in the Big Ten in their first year. Like that's the last team in the last handful of years that's won inside Autzen Stadium is Washington in 2022 with Michael Penix in his first year there. So it's a team that should be mentioned and discussed as one that would love to play spoiler and upset the Ducks at home. And at the end of the day, like it's still a solid offense. There's still some weapons and receivers there with Rodgers at quarterback. So I just wanted to mention it.
Yeah, if they weren't 4-3, Will Rogers would be talked about more, and especially Denzel Boston would be talked about more. 40 catches for 540 yards and 9 touchdowns, and they've got Giles Jackson too. Like they've got two really good receivers. They're different than what they had the last two seasons with the group that they had and Dunze and Polk and forgetting the third one, but they had
McMillan, I did that the other day.
yeah. They had three really good NFL receivers. They've got two. I don't know if we can call Giles Jackson an NFL receiver, but Denzel Boston looks like the next one. And then Jonah Coleman's looked good at running backs. Like their offense is legit. Iowa held them in check a little bit last week or 2 weeks ago, but you're right. Like that game, there will be, even though it's a different roster, it's a different coaching staff, they will be confident coming into Autzen. If Oregon is 11, they'll be confident regardless, but they'll, 11-0 Oregon coming in, that's a recipe for a team wanting to play spoiler and deliver a loss to the Ducks. So that's a good point. All right, Jamison White, 16. How concerned are we about struggling to run the ball within a 3-yard line? It feels like it's been hard to punch the ball in from time to time, most importantly on the final drive against Ohio State. Autzen Audibles. This was a multiple topic submission, not just by Jamison, but by multiple people. There, we got 3 or 4 of these. How concerned should we be about running the football inside the 3-yard line? It's an area that's struggled. Oregon's red zone success, at least against Purdue, was a huge improvement. I think 5 for 5 over the course of its current, average for the season. But nonetheless, you look at Oregon's red zone conversions right now, and even with the 5 for 5, they're still 76th in the country. They're only scoring 83% of the time, and 67% of those are touchdowns. It's definitely a concern here.
I mean, I think the overall running game is like a hair of a concern, especially after their performance against Purdue, where I felt like they were getting beat at the line of scrimmage. Um, inside the 5 at the 3-yard line, like there are teams that do that very well, and then there are teams that do not do it very well. And I think Oregon is somewhere right in the middle. Like Matt mentioned, they were 5 for 5 in the red zone this past week against Purdue, but 3 of those were rushing touchdowns. So there's part of it where it's like, yeah, it could be better. When we talk about like the Ohio State game, like Dan said afterwards, they were trying to score. So it wasn't great that, Whittington went for 4 yards, got down to the 2, and then got stuffed at the 1. I think in normal circumstances, Oregon would have gone for it. They would have went for the 4th down and 1 from the 1-yard line, like pretty normally. But in that situation, you have to take the points. So we didn't necessarily see the red zone touchdown, but we saw the red zone score. I think Oregon's red zone offense is going to be fine. I think they're kind of they get hurt a lot because they go for it on fourth down. They don't necessarily score all the time. Like again in the Ohio State game when they went for it on fourth down and did not score. But overall, I feel like it could be executing a lot better. I feel like the running attack could be a lot better, but scoring within like the 5-yard line can be tough a lot of times just because of how congested it is. And if you miss a block or miss an assignment, there's no wiggle room to operate if you're a receiver, if you're a running back with the ball. You pick your head up and suddenly there are 3 to 4 guys right in front of you. So I think it could be a lot better. I'm not overly concerned about it. I still think that Oregon's offensive line can get the job done. I still think that when Jordan James is in the game, he's able to play bully ball and, when he should be stopped for a 1-yard gain, he turns it into a 2, 3, 4-yard gain. So I'm not overly concerned. I know on paper it doesn't look great, but when you watch the games and see that they're just not rewarded for going for it on fourth down every once in a while, like it kind of makes the stats look worse. But I'm genuinely not concerned by it.
I don't think the jumbo package is as effective as they want it to be. And I think maybe that sometimes limits their ability to make plays when they throw it in there inside the 2 or 3 and they try and score. I think they've only scored on it a couple of times. It's taken them a long time to get through it. It's an issue. It's a concern. To your point, the entire run game is a concern. It would help if it wasn't just Jordan James that consistently snap in, snap out, drive in, drive out, game in, game out was there. If they had another secondary option. We'll see what happens with maybe Jaden Lamar or maybe a Jay Harris getting some extra touches down the road. We'll see if that happens. I don't know if it should. I don't know if it will. But their inability to consistently run the football and generate the big lanes is, I think, the culprit for the red zone struggles. The one caveat, I think, is we haven't seen a ton of play calls with Dylan Gabriel running the football that close to the goal line. And that could be a late season addition. We always see teams do this every year. Like they throw a new wrinkle in at the very end, and maybe Dylan's ability to run the football is being saved for November, or, down the road as a late wrinkle to add to the offense. Maybe that helps. I don't know, but it is a concern to me. Like you got to be able to score consistently here. They haven't done it, and it's no longer like a 1 or 2, 3 game issue. It's turned into they're at their 7th game, and it's still an issue. They're still in the bottom half of the country from a red zone scoring standpoint. But you're also right. Like their decisions to go for it on fourth down a couple times have skewed these numbers, but like that just plays into also the stat of they're struggling to score and they're using an extra opportunity to do it and they're still not getting it. It's one that, hey, like this week, let's see them go 5 for 5 again. Like go in there and score again. Do it for a second week. And maybe the idea or the fear of it will start to change. All right, let's take a quick break. Two questions in, 2 more to go here on the Autzen Audibles Mailbag. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles podcast. Grizzle Muffin, what a name, Grizzle Muffin. Could this be a game where Dan, Tosh, and Will really open things up? A lot of air quote trap game talk last week with Purdue, and a lot of painful memories last time Oregon was number 1 versus Stanford. Is this the leave no doubt game for the start of the end of the stretch? Hashtag Autzen Audibles. And if you're out there and you're wondering when was the last time Oregon was ranked number 1, it was 2012. It was November. Oregon went on the road and kind of just blasted an okay Cal team and then came home with the number 1 ranking to play a 14th ranked Stanford program. And that's the exact Ertz catch. Oregon lost 17-14 in overtime. It's also the D'Anthony Thomas so busy trying to give a high five to Marcus Mariota running down the sideline that he missed the block and Mariota got tackled from behind, and Oregon never ended up scoring on that drive. But could this be the game, Jared, where Dan and Tosh and Will really open things up and leave no doubt that Oregon is the number 1 team in the country?
Maybe. I mean, they haven't really done it all season. They've had like games where they've blown it open, and then a third quarter or like the beginning of the second half, just where they seemed like they let the foot off the gas, or they just can't score that much. I will say that Illinois is certainly a team capable of putting up a lot of points. This is not like Purdue where they struggle on offense and defense. I think Illinois can struggle on defense, but offense with Luke Altmaier, quarterback, like he has some weapons. He has Zachariah Franklin, who used to be Will Stein's wide receiver #1 when he was at UTSA on the outside. So he's a solid ball player. Like this is a team that can score points. And if we're looking at for guys to open it up, I'm not sure if that's what if that's necessarily in the game plan this week against Illinois. I guess we'll find out on Saturday. But Oregon's going to need to score more points than what they have been accustomed to in these sort of blowout games, like against UCLA, against Michigan State, against Purdue, because Illinois could score the rock. So I don't know if they're going to open it up necessarily. I kind of don't like it when people have that notion because I would say like everything is at their disposal every game. And when they do something new, that's kind of opening it up. And they've been doing something new for the last 7 weeks. So I don't know. I don't think that they'll open it up, but it certainly is a time for them to have the lead no doubt game. Just because they are the #1 team in the country now. They have beaten Ohio State. They need to continue this roll and move to 8-0. So if they need to open it up, whatever that may be, to get to that situation, sure, why not? But I still think if Oregon just plays their normal game, adds in the wrinkles that they normally do from a week-to-week basis, like they can win this game with ease. They are the far superior team to Illinois, despite the Fighting Illini being the 20th ranked team in the country.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with your idea of I don't know if they're going to like specifically target this one and say let's open it up, but I think it could happen. Right. I think it could happen organically where Oregon comes out and they throw a 38-14 or a 41-13 type performance, and it's a dominating win from start to finish. They go wire to wire and with the lead, and they're not doing anything any different from a play calling perspective or leaving starters in longer than normal, but just playing their brand of football. And if they look good, it could be that type of a performance where people walk away saying, wow, they left no doubt that they're the #1 team in the country. And that's because, like, as strange as it feels, like this Illinois team is ranked and they're starting to generate, some national respect. And no one's out here trying to say that they're a playoff contender team right now. And no one's trying to say that they're going to be a team that's one of the 5 or 10 most talented rosters in college football. But they're well respected though. And if you blow out an opponent that's got a number next to their name, whether you meant for it or not, people are going to look at that and go, "Oh, wow, they played really good. They left it all out there. They showed us a ton. This is a team that you should be fearful of." And that could happen on Saturday. If they're 21 point or 23 point favorites for a reason. Oregon is the superior team. They've got more talent. They've got more depth. They still have to play the game, obviously. But if they play clean, your question could organically just get answered anyways, whether they meant to do it or not.
Yeah, and that's kind of like my broader point is like they open it up all the time. Like they bring out new formations and new ideas all the time. And I don't know, again, like it doesn't feel like it's like what they would do is they would like put Illinois and Target on the schedule. Like, hey, let's go to page 38 of the playbook now. We're ready. Like, let's do it here against Illinois. It's a good team. Like they don't want to fuck around and find out, frankly, against Illinois because they're 6-1. They come off a nice win against Michigan. It's a big win in their program. Like they don't want to mess around and find out that like, oh, this doesn't work, and now we're in 3rd and 12. So that'd be great.
All right, Theo Winter with the last question. What's your guys' take on the Ducks being ranked #1? Do you think they'll maintain the spot if they win out? And lastly, is this team better than the last Duck team that was ranked #1? Like I mentioned earlier, 2012 is the last time the Oregon Ducks were ranked number one in the country. That was a year in which Oregon went 11-1 in the regular season. Their only loss that season was to Stanford. To answer like the question from is this team more talented? That's hard to make because college football, even 12 years ago, was just drastically different than it was today, or than it is today. But I can tell you right now that 2012 team had probably 25 NFL dudes on it. I've got the roster in front of me. I'll count the number here in a second. But does this Oregon team have 30 NFL guys on it? Who knows? Because you're now asking to project guys that are freshmen and sophomores for 2 or 3 years down the road. But it'd be a hell of a game. It would be an absolute hell of a football game.
Yeah, and my take on them being number one is just they've earned it. Like they've won all the games this year. They've won the close ones at the beginning of the season when things were struggling on the offensive line. That offensive line learned to gel. Dylan Gabriel learned how to protect himself in the pocket and find some open receivers. And then the defense has been, stout all season long. And now it's all kind of coming together and clicking. And we saw it 2 weeks ago against Ohio State. In the biggest game at Autzen Stadium, maybe in the history of it. We won't know for a long time, but it certainly seemed like it then with the sellout crowd and everything. So they've certainly earned the fact that they can be the number one team in the country, that they can stay the number one team in the country. And I do think that they'll maintain it if they win out. I think it's kind of clear. It's like if you're the number one team in the country, and then this might change depending on conference championship games, depending on what the matchups are. But if Oregon wins out, they beat Wisconsin, they beat Michigan, they beat everybody else. Like, I don't really think that there's an obvious team other than Georgia who could succeed them as the number one team in the country. And I think that that's going to be like the kind of the storyline. Like, will a one-loss Georgia team move ahead of the undefeated if Oregon wins out team? And it could certainly happen just because that Georgia's going to play better competition down the stretch and might have a better conference championship game matchup because Penn State and Ohio State still have to play each other. And on paper, it looks like the winner of that game on November 23rd, I think it is, that team is going to be like the team that goes into the title game and potentially faces Oregon if they win out. Or on November 2nd, I believe it is, Ohio State plays Indiana, another unbeaten team in the Big Ten, where maybe that game actually dictates who's going to play in the Big Ten championship game. So we'll see if they remain number one. I think that they should, just because they've proven it and they've got the talent level and the skill level to do so and to be the number one seed going into the college football playoffs. But I'm not the CFP election committee. I don't make those decisions, so it's not up to me.
Will they maintain the spot? I mean, probably. I don't have like the future lines in front of me, but Oregon should be favored in every remaining game going forward. So the idea would then be like to your point, is a 13-0 or a 12-0 Oregon team going to be ahead of a potential 11-1 Georgia team? I agree. Georgia's the only one that could catch Oregon should Oregon win out. I think the table is set for them to win out. We'll see if injuries and the flukiness of November football, if it catches Oregon or if they play blemish free. But Illinois will give Oregon a ranked opportunity for a win. Wisconsin could play their way into the top 25, depending on what happens between now and then. It wouldn't surprise me if somehow Michigan, if they find a way to get into the top 25. Boise State and Ohio State are there. So they'll have ranked wins next to their name. This isn't going to be a case where Oregon played maybe maybe two good teams all year, and then and they're winning just because they're number one, just because they're winning. They'll have a strong resume to stand on. I think if they don't lose any games, that they will go number one into the college football playoff or college football championship game weekend. And if they win that one, then they're definitively going to be the number 1 seed. I don't think Georgia will catch them unless they just pulverize every team that they play. They'll have more opportunities for top 25 teams, but if Oregon and Georgia are, if they both win out, Oregon will have 0 losses and Georgia will have 1, and that still matters to a degree. Unless Georgia, like I said, just pulverizes everybody. But I don't think that will happen. That Georgia team, though, that defense, especially against Texas, looked absolutely dynamic and game-changing, game-wrecking. An Oregon-Georgia game, should they ever meet in the playoffs, would be fantastic to watch. But nonetheless, your Ducks are number 1 right now and should probably be there until they lose. And it's a strange feeling to talk about, but nonetheless, here they are. They deserved it. They've won their way here. And now they are the standard. They are the team that everyone is chasing, and that adds extra pressure, extra attention, extra focus. Everything will be ramped up moving forward even more, which has already been pretty high for this Duck team.
Yeah, the 1 week that people should pay attention to in terms of will Georgia jump in front is that Georgia plays Tennessee on November 16th, and it's at home for Georgia, so they should be the favorites. They should win that game on paper, but if there's an opportunity for some of the voters to say, wow, this Georgia team is better than this Oregon team, assuming that, both these teams continue to win out the rest of the season up until that point. If the Bulldogs, if they win consistently and if they win big over Tennessee, then I could see plenty of voters switching their first place votes. Right now it's 59-2 in favor of Oregon for first place votes. So that tells you that did they maintain, did they earn that spot? Yeah, absolutely. But a couple weeks, we'll see. They also play Ole Miss. I don't think that'll be too much of a mover. That'll be the same, or the weekend after Oregon plays Michigan. So I don't know. There's a lot of games left. This is why you play them. You have to go out and win every week. You can't just metaphorically say oh, they're going to win this week. No doubt about it.
Sure.
That's what Alabama said when they played Vanderbilt the other week. You have to go out and win these games.
Well, and we know November we're not there yet. There's still 2 more weeks left in October. But the month of November is where craziness, fluky stuff happens. I go back to 2019. I think all 3 of us were there, you, me, and Eric. But ASU, a game in which you just mentioned it, a game they should have won, a game that This was a team that they close out the season and they get to the college football playoffs, and they went to ASU and they didn't get blown out, but they got smacked around by a team that they should not have been smacked around by. And they lost, and that effectively eliminated them from the playoffs. And those types of losses happen everywhere. And the month of November, where it will be survive and advance, doesn't really matter how many points you win by, how pretty it looks, just win. And that's kind of where Oregon's at just in general now from its season, because everything is attainable if they just win. And it's going to be hard, though. November is just a crazy month for football. It always is, and it will be this month, this season. So, all right, that's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles Mailbag. Thank you for submitting your questions. Really appreciate the time. Next week, hopefully, Eric will be back in the saddle holding down the court for the mailbag. But until then, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Peace.